Welcome to Get Your Bell Rung, Pro Wrestling Podcast. I am your host, KG. With me, I have a gentleman who was with WWF at the time, way back when, during the very beginnings of your WrestleMania and those early years. I am talking about Ed Helinski. Did I pronounce your last name correctly?
You got it perfect, man. Yeah, I'm not the capital of Finland, Helsinki, for once. You know that?
Perfect. How are you?
I'm great. How you doing tonight?
Doing all right, my man. We're actually on the road. I'm actually coming live from Lake Placid, New York. So coming to you live. I normally do this in front of. What's that?
You're about 4 hours away from me right now.
Oh, really? Are you in New York?
Oh, yeah. I am in
Nice.
New York.
Nice.
I'm in the Finger Lakes region of New York.
Okay. Yeah, man. Beautiful country.
But spend lots of money here. Lower my taxes.
So, what years were you with WWE?
I was with the WWF/E 1983 to 1987. And I came aboard in 1983. July 30th, 1983 was my first gig, and that was Madison Square Garden. Steve Taylor and I were hired to start the magazine and run the magazine and get it up and running and be part of the plan and the machine that Vince McMahon was putting together to take over the country and take over the world.
What got you into the magazine and actually writing?
I started off as a newspaper writer back when I was 15 years old out in the Buffalo area, a newspaper called the Tonawanda News. It doesn't exist anymore, but I liked writing about sports. I was also fortunate to grow up in that Western New York area where we had a lot of pro wrestling. We had wrestling from Toronto. We had wrestling from Hamilton. We had wrestling from Buffalo. And my dad and I used to watch Friday Night Wrestling from Memorial Auditorium in Buffalo. We watched it religiously. And I kind of got an inkling right there what the business was all about and really enjoyed it and took a liking to it and, continued watching it, not so much, getting into my teenage years. But after I took a job as a sports writer in Auburn, New York, we had a wrestling show, a WWF wrestling show come into town at the local community college. And I talked my way into getting credentials, which was a small feat back then because they didn't want the publicity of mainstream media. So right. I dealt with a guy named Ed Cohen who booked the buildings, and we made a deal. He says, whatever you write, send to us and we'll let you in to cover the show. And I gave him my word that I had a lot of respect for the business and I would be respectful of the business. So it was a Thursday night show. I think it was June 16th, 1983. And the next day I did a piece and we had a photographer there and he took a couple of shots. But then the following Sunday, 2 days later, he did a picture page. Back then when newspapers did picture pages, when they couldn't sell the advertising on the page, so they made a picture page of it. And it was a spectacular page done by Steve Taylor of pro wrestling. So I sent that along, mailed it out that Sunday afternoon. By Wednesday, Ed Cohen's calling me at my apartment, asking me if I'd be interested and Steve would be interested in flying down and interviewing for a job for this national magazine that they were starting. And Steve was married, and it was quite the risk on his part. I'm single and footloose and fancy free, and I have no risk at that point. Right. So I said, sure, I'll take the interview. And so it was about a week later, we flew down to the Cape. We're interviewed and we're hired right on the spot and negotiated our salaries at that point. And then when we got back on the plane at Syracuse and got off the plane, we just said to ourselves, what the hell did we just do? Because we were crossing over. We were crossing over from mainstream journalism over to entertainment the wrestling side, and some people would call it the dark side at that point.
Right. Now, what was the atmosphere like when you first walked into those doors with WWF? Because again, this was kind of the beginning of Vince McMahon basically wanting to take over the world with professional wrestling.
It was. We had different ways that we were welcome. In the office, we were welcome like it was an everyday normal business. When we went to the arenas, went to television taping, we were greeted with some skepticism and guys not accepting us right away, because the fraternity of kayfabe, and they weren't willing to let you into this fraternity readily. You had to earn your way into it. So it took us a while to earn the trust of some of the boys. And once they realized what was going on and where this thing was headed to, then they got with the program, and they were really accommodating at that point. Some guys like Andre were a stickler. I mean, Andre was so old school, and I love the guy dearly, but God forbid if you ever walked into the dressing room when he was playing cards. If you had to drop something off, you dropped it off and get the hell out of there. If not, he would get up and yell at you, "Get out, get out, get out." And Andre was probably the toughest person to earn trust for. And it took me a couple of years. And then Andre and I became very, very good friends.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Hogan, what was Hogan like during that time?
What was Hogan like?
Yeah, because I mean, he was the guy that they were putting on that rocket, and they were basically building everything around him. He was going to carry that company, which was a success. But at that point, they still didn't know exactly, if this was going to become as big as it did, or if it was going to fail or not. So, I mean, what was he like at that, carrying that load on his back?
They knew Hulk was going to succeed. I mean, he came off of that great performance as Thunder Lips and Rocky. And Vince really liked that. And Vince always made it the point, I can make anybody a superstar in 3 weeks. Give them enough television time. And Hulk, with his personality, and Hulk generating excitement, that didn't take a lot to generate that. It went rather quickly when they brought him in, and then within a month he's getting or 2 months, I should say, he's getting a title shot. As the Sheik was just a transitional champion at that point. Then it just exploded at that point. Terry was understanding. Terry was very savvy of the business back then. Vince was going to make him champion no matter what, because Vern refused to do so. And so I think Vince was going to do it in spite, and it was going to work out by hook or by crook and by hell or high water. And he did. And it was very, very successful. But it didn't really get to Hulk's head too much. Later on down the road it did, because he was just being inundated with a lot of different things. And, you have to understand, these guys, they can't walk out in public. And especially the way Vince was barraging TV at that point, these guys were becoming everyday mainstream stars. And that posed its own set of challenges at that point.
Right. Now, you come in, it's 83. Vince has these huge ideas, of taking wrestling to places that it's never been before. Was there a point that you're like, what did I get myself into? Was there any doubt in your mind that Vince was going to be able to do what he wanted to do?
Oh, he was going to do whatever he wanted to do, and he was just going to succeed. The question was I still going to be around for the ride on something like that?
Right.
You have to understand, because of the nature of the business, things were changing. Storylines were changing. Angles were changing. I'm doing a magazine that's 30 days to 6 weeks out in advance. That is a lifetime in the wrestling business where things can change on a heartbeat. And the way the business was built at that point, we had different tiers of venues, meaning we had high schools and colleges at the very bottom. We had I call them mid-America venues, like maybe Syracuse and Albany, Utica, Hershey. And so these guys were working on different angles and different finishes. So by the time they got to Baltimore or Philadelphia or Pittsburgh or Madison Square Garden or Boston Garden or Hartford, they knew what the best finish was going to be, and draw the most amount of money and have a lasting effect for the next card. So this was a juggling act all along. The many times that I had to rewrite stories, and on top of it, I was never a magazine writer. I'm a newspaper writer, and there's a difference. And so Vince and I clashed on that. He says, "You're a great newspaper writer, but I'm looking for a magazine writer." And Linda was the intermediary. She was our publisher. She was known as Linda Kelly on the masthead, and that was by design. And it's, you can only take it so much so long. The thing working for Vince is this: brilliant man. You won't hear me bash him in any way, shape, or form. I'm one fortunate man to be in that position, and what I call the golden age of the wrestling business. I'm a footnote in history, but I was very, very fortunate to be there for that 4 years. Lasting, in the magazine for that year seemed like a lifetime, and it also seemed like a prison sentence, because can I get out of this thing fast enough? It's just like, what can I? It's almost like you couldn't please Vince in any way, shape, or form. He was a machine. He worked many, many hours. He was a workaholic, and he expected his people to do so. The only downside of that, he wasn't paying us to work these 18 hours a day. And so it's just like, how much of a grind can it really? It takes a lot out of you after a while.
Right.
Plus, being on the road never helped. Plus, being on the road never helps at all either.
Right. There's been people that I've talked to that said that, Vince was a son of a bitch. But then there's other people who I've talked to that absolutely loved Vince. As you said, hard worker. He was a perfectionist in many ways. Did you ever have to deal with the side of Vince McMahon where he just lost his mind on you and went off on you for something?
Oh yeah, it happened to everybody. So I mean, it's creative people, to Vince's extent, that's going to happen. It's more frustration on his part that, why can't you be a lot like Vince?
Right.
And why aren't you seeing the same thing as Vince? And sometimes we do, and a lot of times we don't, because we don't know the total picture. And he's got all these things coming at him simultaneously at different angles. And he's getting input from his road agents, on feedback on shows. Are there problems with talent? Who's hurt, who's not hurt? Who are we bringing in? You have to understand, we're bringing in talent left and right every 3 weeks in the TV on Allentown and Hamburg. There was somebody new every time. It's just like, how are we going to incorporate all these people? And then, we had some guys that got pushed out, unfortunately, because there was only so much room in the inn, and some guys had to leave. And that's a shame.
Right.
I mean, I'm trying to think of the Russian Bear. You got pushed out. Koloff. I mean, nicest guy in the world, a terrific worker, former WWF champion, but his shelf life expired. And that's what you have to understand about wrestling and how Vince treated people. It doesn't matter if you were in the Office, magazine, or one of the boys, you have a certain shelf life. The only person that really avoided that, I think, was Howard Finkel. Howard stayed on for years and decades. And I don't know how he did it, but Howard took more stuff to the grave with him than we'll ever know.
Yeah. Pat Patterson seemed to have avoided that as well. He was with Vince for many, many, many years.
Yeah, but he got in trouble with the Ring Boys, and then
Right.
had to step aside for a while. So we have the continuity. He didn't have the continuity, but somehow he knew where the bodies were buried as well too. And so Pat had it in with Vince, and Vince will use you as a promoter. He'll use you as long as he needs you. Apparently, he needed Pat quite a bit.
Right. Talk to me about your very first story once you got to WWF/WWE. Do you remember writing it? Tell me that. Talk to me about that process. Did you have to rewrite it a bunch of times?
The one that sticks out the most is we did it. There was an angle with Eddie Gilbert. Eddie Gilbert getting a neck injury, and I don't remember right off the top of my head how it transpired or who it was involved with, but I remember we the next day we already had the neck brace on him and all the other stuff, and we took him to Harrisburg to the infamous Dr. Zahorian's urologist's office, and he was the doctor to check out Eddie, and he was under Dr. Zahorian's care, and we filmed it and wrote it up. Back then, it was pretty much just only for the program at that point, because I was writing for the magazine, the monthly magazine, and the monthly arena programs, and the monthly programs were probably somewhere 12 or 16 pages, whereas the magazine was a heck of a lot more, probably 4 times as much. And so it was writing that, the dastardly thing that happened to Eddie Gilbert in his neck injury. And did I have to rewrite that? No, that was pretty simple. The photos really sold the story. And I was very fortunate with Steve Taylor, and he was a phenomenal photographer to portray those things, put those pictures into words. And that was a lot of it at that point. I mean, Steve just could capture that moment. And Steve really never did wrestling before until that one show at the community college. But he learned on the fly rather quickly and got up to speed and what he needed to do at that point. He was very fortunate as well too, because Vince locked out all the other pro wrestling illustrated, Bill Apter and Craig Peters, and George Napolitano. All those guys got locked out, and they were pissed about it. So Steve had a full run of the WWF shows. Now, mind you, these guys snuck in with long sub sandwiches, bags, and cameras behind them. Were shooting through that while they were sitting in the stands. And these guys tell me the stories about it today. We laugh about it, but Vince was very particular about his proprietary rights when it comes to his shows. And there were sometimes we had to throw some people out who were just, taking pictures with an Instamatic camera.
Wow.
I mean, we had to make an example of, sorry, you got to leave. And there were some upset people with that, but that, it's no different than a Broadway play or any other type of performance where they say no camera. Right.
Now, was there ever a time that you got in trouble by Vince specifically about a story you wrote, or was Vince McMahon such a controlled, a person that needed to be controlled that he had to approve anything before you guys published it?
Oh, he had to approve everything. First of all, and did he get mad at me once? Yeah, I did. Wild Samoans were going to become tag team champions again, maybe like for the 18th time. And I wrote the story. Yeah, the 18-time world tag team champions, and they also lost it 17 times. And of course, Vincent liked that reference to 17 times losing it. He goes, "We need to be positive. We got just accentuate them becoming tag team champions. nothing about this stuff. You're going back and doing newspaper reporting again. I wasn't wrong. It's just
Right.
I didn't verbalize the propaganda as I should have.
Right.
I'm 25 years old at the time.
Now, you talked about watching wrestling Friday nights when you were younger. By the time you started working for Vince McMahon in the WWF, you're talking about another era in professional wrestling. What was your thoughts about professional wrestling during that time? Was it going in the direction that you liked? Was it one of those things that you wish that it was more like it was when you were a kid?
The direction that it was going to, I had no problem with it in any way, shape, or form. You got to remember, all these TV shows, watching WWF wrestling, were on at 11:30 at night, midnight, 1 o'clock in the morning. That's where TV stations gave them the time slots to air the programming. So when we had Tuesday Night Titans and we were doing All American Wrestling, and now we're in regular time periods, Sunday at noon or Tuesdays at 7:30. Oh my God, that's a whole new world at that point. And it's a whole new viewership. And you're taking it from just a select amount of people, and now you're bringing it mainstream. And then when we went to affiliated with MTV and the Rock and Wrestling connection,
Right.
that was crazy. And then John Stossel's getting the hell beat out of him by Dave Schultz, and which I was about 15 feet away from that when that happened. I said, "Oh boy," when Stossel said, "I think this is fake," and Schultz, being the good soldier that he was, he did what he was told and instructed to do. It cost him his career, but he did what he did.
I met him a few months ago. I had the pleasure of talking to him. He wouldn't go on camera, but he sat and talked to me for a good bit. And one of the things that he told me was, he looked at me and he's like, he told me he would do it again. He's like, he said, "I am not sorry that I slapped that son of a bitch. I was protecting the business." So even though it cost him his career, it's something that he still stands by to this day.
Oh, I caught up with Dave as well too, about a year ago. Nice guy. I mean, he was driving truck. I mean, and at one time, I guess he was a bounty hunter on top of it. And I mean, as a wrestler, he came in as a reputation as a crazy guy, and
Right.
he maintained that reputation. And whether it was true or not, he played the part 100%. And
yeah,
that's okay. At least you always kept him at arm's length.
Right.
I was very fortunate to meet quite the eclectic cast of characters. Fred Blassie took me under his wing that first night at Madison Square Garden, and he showed me a lot just that first night, and how he could rev up a crowd and generate the heat. And some of the stuff that he said, I can't even repeat to this day. I mean, he just knew. The other thing that struck me that first night was the amount of money gambling that went on amongst friends in the stands at Madison Square Garden. Guys betting with their buddies on what the finish was going to be. And after match, you would see money change hands. And Fred also taught me how to watch for when a guy is gigging himself. He says, "Don't watch the guy, prancing around the ring. Watch the guy on the mat." And it becomes clear as day. If you're not looking for it, you won't see it. But if you focus in on it, it's really easy to spot.
Yeah, it's
you
funny.
learn those type of things.
It's funny you mentioned about you mentioned about the gambling and people betting on the finish back then. It's funny because today it is something that's advertised on TV. They encourage you during these wrestling shows to bet on the finishes or different things you think is going to happen during the match. Now, you were around for the very first, one of the biggest moments that happened in professional wrestling, something that changed professional wrestling forever, which was the very first WrestleMania. Talk to me about the buzz. Talk to me about the chaos. Talk to me about the stress that you're seeing going on back then because of the build to this show.
Well, you had a lot of different things. You were bringing in Mr. T. He had a very good, successful show, the A-Team. When he came in, they did a couple of practice runs. And they brought Mr. T in, and quite frankly, he was an asshole. He was a pain in the ass. He was very aloof. Guys like Piper didn't like him because they were coming, and several guys didn't like him because he's coming in from the outside and getting quite the push. But T also, from what I understand, T also ran up quite the expense bill, like $35,000 that I think without Vince's permission. So, there's things that were said that, if WrestleMania wasn't going to succeed, the WWF was going to go out of business. Well, that's been refuted. I mean, there was plenty of money there. Did Vince put up his house for it? Probably, as collateral. Probably. But then a lot of people starting out like that do that type of thing.
Right. So
getting the push from Saturday Night Live, getting the mainstream push as well too. WrestleMania, you brought in Muhammad Ali and Billy Martin. I mean, Liberace. You were bringing in all types of entertainers and entertainment at that point. And, it sold out Madison Square Garden. They probably could have sold out 2 or 3 Madison Square Gardens because it was just that popular. And actually, it was quite a good wrestling show on top of it. Sometimes these things can become very anticlimactic, but this one held true to it. It really did.
Now, tell me if this is a true statement or not, in your opinion. You mentioned that if WrestleMania would have never, if it wasn't successful, it's been refuted that WWF would have stayed in business. But do you agree that if WrestleMania wasn't successful, that professional wrestling would not be where it's at today?
That's a fair statement. Yeah, I would say that's true. That ratcheted it up a couple levels, no doubt about that, once that became successful. However, when we came to WrestleMania 2, where we went the 3 venues, and it was something that they've never done since then because they learned their lesson, I think it brought it down a little bit.
Right.
Okay, we're not going to try this idea. But in Canada, they were kicking things around with bigger stadiums prior to Pontiac Silverdome. I mean, they did CNE Stadium in Toronto in August of '86, and they drew like 65,000 people. So they had an idea that they could draw the Pontiac Silverdome, and it was a perfect geographic area because you could draw from Ontario. You could, draw from anywhere on the East Coast. You get on a plane, you're hour and a half from Detroit. You're pulling from the Midwest, Chicago, Indianapolis, Louisville, Cincinnati at that point. It was a no-brainer at that point. Now, whether it was 93,000 people or 78,000 people, whatever, all I know is the damn place was packed. And it was crazy. It was insanely good. So getting back to your thing of 1985 with the first WrestleMania, yeah, absolutely. Right. That was a stepping stone. But they also could have misstepped quite badly with WrestleMania 2.
Right. Do you have any stories you can share about the events behind the scenes that day of WrestleMania?
We always had a problem at that point with bootleggers,
Mhm.
bootlegging merchandise, knockoff merchandise. Everywhere we had a show, we had that problem. Madison Square Garden was no different in New York City. I mean, Madison Square Garden, you could buy an umbrella and a pair of sunglasses from anybody off the street. Now they're picking up Hulk Hogan T-shirts and knockoff WrestleMania T-shirts. That's always a problem, and you always try to get the police involved with that. God, we had that problem in Philadelphia, New York, Boston. You know, people looked at it as an opportunity, and sometimes they got arrested. Sometimes more than likely, they didn't get arrested. So that was always a challenge and always a problem with that. That's something that we couldn't control. I mean, we could control a lot of everything else. We could control the media. We could control the venue. We could control the wrestlers. We could control ticket price. We could control that it was going to be in a family atmosphere, and the pricing was towards family atmosphere. And that'll bring me to wrestling today, where the pricing is getting out of hand, and families can't afford it anymore.
Right. Right.
But that's the business model that they're going with. So
right.
You can't knock it. I mean, yeah, they're publicly traded companies, and they've got to always answer to their stockholders. But if you look at WWE shows today, you're not seeing the Syracuse, New Yorks anymore. You're not seeing Rochester, New York anymore. You're not seeing Hershey, Pennsylvania anymore. You're seeing shows that are done for TV, and then you're having shows in Washington, because once they finish in the state of Washington, they're going to Australia or they're going to the Middle East, and they're just hopping a plane to take it that way. The overseas money is huge. We were just seeing some of that overseas money back then in the mid 80s, but this has gotten even bigger.
Let me ask you a question, and I'm going to go back to talk to you about professional wrestling back then. But since you brought up wrestling today, let me ask you this question. We're seeing a lot of there's a lot of fans out there, and even some wrestlers that are very down on professional wrestling today. Is this a matter of we're just seeing a lot of the old timers, fans included, and the wrestlers who are just kind of trying to fight the change within professional wrestling? Because it seems like every new generation has gone through this. For the love of God, Harley Race, I always use him as an example. Harley Race is one of the biggest legends in professional wrestling. But back when he first started, the old timers back then said he would never make it because he was too cartoonish. Is this what we're seeing today, or is professional wrestling really in a place that they shouldn't be at right now?
Couple ways to look at this. First of all, the older generation is always going to bitch about the younger generation. Doesn't matter. It happened back then. Bruno Sammartino didn't like Hulk Hogan and the way the business was going at that point. He preferred the comfort of being a Northeast territory, and that's it. And why do you need to go national? And why do you need to bust up the alliances and the territories? What I noticed the big difference is that I don't think character development is as deep or thorough today as it was in the 80s. Back then, when we had these tiers of venues, these guys could work on storylines. You could develop, I think, more storylines more effectively on TV. With, let's say, a Piper's Pit or any of these other shows that we had. So, and the thing is, the wrestlers themselves with the agents really developed the angles and the storylines, as opposed to these quote unquote writers that they bring in who don't know shit from Shinola when it comes to pro wrestling, or developing a character, and they're writing for TV as opposed to writing for professional wrestling. So I think that hurts the business. I also think that not being able to go to Syracuse or Rochester or Albany to see a live professional wrestling show hurts in the long run as well too, because when you're at these venues, at these shows, you can get hit with some spit, you could get hit with some sweat, you're just that close. You can hear the grunting, the groaning, the swearing, you can hear the slapping, the body slams. But on TV, as much as they try, and they do work very well at it, it's just not the same.
Right. Now I want to go back to the build-up for the very first WrestleMania. You as a writer, someone that was writing for the magazine, what's this idea for this WrestleMania started to come out? Was Vince McMahon?
Well, first of all,
sure.
First of all, I at that point I was no longer the magazine. I was in the marketing and merchandising department at that point. So that changed.
Right.
What I remember of it, though, it was very, very orchestrated by Vince, almost like approving word by word on what's going to be said and how to approach this and build this thing up. On the merchandising end of it, it's like, we need to get all this product out to as many venues as possible. Now, first WrestleMania, a lot of closed circuit TV in buildings. All of them were successful, I think, except Pittsburgh, where they had a problem with their signal and technologies. Technology is a wonderful thing when it works right, but when it doesn't, it goes completely.
Sucks.
Yeah, it does. So we were sending out all kinds of stuff to these places and bringing in all kinds of money. You know, we had, I think, 40 different venues that we were sending merchandise, t-shirts, programs, magazines, headbands, foam fingers, all that stuff. And it was just, we were bringing in a lot of money at that point. It was tremendous. WrestleMania 1, I mean, I sat 7th row ringside, Billy Crystal sitting behind me with his wife. You know, I'm dressed up in a suit and I'm looking at Billy. I turned to him and hey, Billy, great show last night on Saturday Night Live. And he doesn't know me from Adam. But you know what? You just play the part and you fake it till you make it. You know, that's like, who is this guy? And he's dressed pretty nice. And you're in New York City and that's just the way it is, you know? Everything was we knew WrestleMania was a success. There's no doubt about that. It was huge. People were spending good money to sit in arenas, watch a big screen TV, watching WrestleMania 1 from Madison Square Garden on March 31st, 1985. I mean, it was tremendous. I mean,
everybody, and I did a little bit even with this interview with you, but everyone puts such a big emphasis on WrestleMania 1. I've always wondered this, though. Was WrestleMania 1 as important as WrestleMania 2, or was WrestleMania 2 more important? And the reason being is because WrestleMania was so new at the time, one could argue that, well, when you have something that is being promoted as big as WrestleMania was, then of course it's going to probably be successful. But WrestleMania 2, now we're going to really see the success of WrestleMania 1, because will the people who got WrestleMania or would see WrestleMania, who attended WrestleMania, will they be back for WrestleMania 2? Do you think that WrestleMania 2 was even more important than the first one because of that?
Yeah, I do, for the simple reason that we were also in the Rosemont Horizon, which we were in the Midwest at that point. And we were establishing a big stronghold and a big footprint in Chicago. And that's a huge city. They were still farting around trying who's going to take control of St. Louis and Sam Muchnick and or Kansas City and Harley but Chicago was good, and then out in Los Angeles as well too. So we were having the West Coast in the middle, and of course Nassau Coliseum. WrestleMania 2 also was the barometer to if we have a lousy show or not so good a show, are we still going to be in business, or how badly this is going to hurt us? And by and large, it really didn't. Yeah, were some people disappointed a little bit? Yeah. Were they still entertained? Sure. Did they get to see matches from the other two venues, all three venues, I should say? Yeah, they did. Was it a long show? Sure. But you lost a little bit if you're sitting in Nassau Coliseum and you're flipping over to the Rosemont Horizon for an hour. You're losing a little bit of momentum and some steam in your venue. And I'm sure that happened also. People felt that way in Chicago and Los Angeles as well, too. But it was a good try. I mean, between those three buildings, he had close to 60,000 people. I mean, paying bodies in those venues. So, yeah, he tripled what he did at Madison Square Garden. So, I mean, yeah, it was important. No doubt about that. And he didn't screw it up, and they didn't ruin the business either.
Right. Now, tell me, was there a moment that the light went off and you were like, I'll be damned, Vince McMahon's going to do it. He's actually going to do what he said he's going to do with professional wrestling. And if there was that moment with you, talk to me about it. Was there a certain thing that happened to make you realize this?
Yeah. This was when the Iron Sheik was going to become WWF champion. That was December 26, 1983. And I flew home back to Buffalo for Christmas. And my mother, who was pretty sharp, and I said, I gotta go back to New York on the 26th, the day after Christmas. And she was like, why do you have to go? Why do you have to go? Why do you have to go? Mom, we have a big show at Madison Square Garden, and I got to be there. And she looked at me and she said, are you working for the mob? Are you working for the mafia? And I looked at her and I said, well, I thought about it. I said, well, Vince McMahon, Irish. Yeah, I guess you could think that. The Irish mob. Yeah. And so that light went on at that point. It's like, yeah, this thing is going to be big. You have to understand, Cosgrove, the Sheik, he was great at his gimmick. I mean, he was the Iranian. He's a legitimate Iranian, and he could draw the heat. And of course, Blassie, knew how to draw the heat as well too. I mean, Fred was fearless, even when he got older in age. He used to tell me how he'd been stabbed going to the ring when he was a wrestler, or had battery acid thrown on him, or hit with flying batteries. So, I mean, he was fearless in the heat that he could draw. And the thing that we did a couple months beforehand, we did a photo shoot at the United Nations. I'm driving the company car, and I pull up double parked at the United Nations, and Blassie and the Sheik get out there, and Sheik's got that Khomeini flag. And Steve Taylor, I said, boys, we got maybe 10 or 15 minutes. We got to get out of here, because you don't know what's going to happen. Are we going to get arrested? Are we going to get shot? Are we going to get stabbed? And he got out in front of the United Nations and started waving that flag. And I just looked around, and the amount of people pouring out of the buildings, they were coming onto the street to see what the hell was going on. And I had the window rolled down. I said, boys, you got about 2 minutes. You got to wrap it up. We got to get the hell out of here. And they jumped into the car, Blassie and Sheik, and they were laughing like two little kids. And Sheik is dismantling these flags. And I said, make sure all the doors are locked, boys, and the windows are up. We got to get out of here. You know that? But they roared all the way. They laughed all the way to at that point, we were in Stamford, Greenwich, Connecticut. They laughed every mile of the way. This is great. Look at the heat we got. And he did. So Sheik was a great transition wrestler. It's too bad that he only kept it for 4 weeks.
Right.
And then, then he had to give the belt over to Hogan. But that was part of the plan. Even though Vern offered him $100,000 to break Hogan's leg, and and don't drop the strap. And
Wow.
Sergeant Slaughter, who's a good friend of mine, told me this story, and I'm in contact with Sarge every week. He says, yeah, the Sheik came to him and said, they want me to not drop the strap and break Hogan's leg, and Vern will give me $100,000. And Sarge said, don't do it, because you'll make a hell of a lot more money than $100,000. You'll ruin your career if you do it that way.
Right. Yeah.
And so, Sheik was torn by that. And then, Sheik had his own demons after that and got out of control a bit. But I think a lot of it was because he wasn't heavyweight champion. I mean, he loved being a heavyweight champion. He really did. And he was a really good heavyweight champion.
Right.
But
You
he's no
mentioned
different than Koloff. Go ahead.
Right. You mentioned Sergeant Slaughter. A few months ago, I had his daughter Kelly on my podcast, and she is such a magnificent individual. I really enjoy talking to her. I hope one day I'm lucky enough to have Sergeant Slaughter on my podcast. But you talk about the Sheik. Was there a moment, including that moment, that you were worried about, actually worried about your life? Because, I mean, these guys used to talk about heat. This is the generation that the fans would throw batteries at them, battery acid. I've heard about urine, their cars being attacked. Because you were just seen with them, did you ever get worried about your life being threatened?
Being seen, it's not like today. With the association,
Right?
Were we concerned? Yes. Did we know enough to get away and stay away? Yeah, we picked our spots. I mean, when we were at shows and the wrestlers would come at us for whatever reason, we were part of the show and we had to react accordingly. I mean, and they used us to be part of the show, and that's okay.
Right.
They would laugh. We would laugh about it afterwards in private. But the thing is with these guys, if there was going to be a problem, they had our backs. These wrestlers did. They were going to. That's when we knew that we were accepted and we were part of the fraternity. When that happened, and were we wary? Yes. Were we really fearful? No, not really. We knew enough to get away and stay away. Now, did a lot of people have guns at that point and carrying knives? Maybe, but we weren't sticking around long enough to find out. I mean, we weren't going to get into the conflict. We would just move on and say, enough is enough, and let's go.
Yeah. You talk about being accepted by the guys, and I know to a degree, not to the degree that you were accepted, but I remember I felt the first time when people like Darla Staggs and the original Sunday from the Glow Girls and a few of the wrestlers from back in the day of the industry invited me to their table to hang out, to go have lunch with them. It is a pretty good feeling whenever you realize that they're accepting you to be part of that family and they're allowing, they're talking to you about stuff. Talk to me about the feeling that you had when you were finally accepted by that wrestling family.
Really, at television taping. We did it at Allentown on Tuesdays and Hamburg on Wednesdays. And, I'm trying to get story ideas and storyline. I wasn't like Pro Wrestling Illustrated where these guys sat in their office all day and concocted these stories. I mean, my stories and even my successors, they had some merit and they had some truth and some background behind it as opposed to pure fiction. So you got to learn a little bit, guys, and where they came from and whatnot. And some of them would do interviews with me in character, which was great. Because now you knew exactly their verbiage and they afforded you that. So I always felt at that point you made it at a point for them to trust you enough to do that. Because they understood that, oh my God, we got this monthly magazine. We've got this monthly program, and this is my way of getting a push and getting over to the fans. And ultimately, I'm going to make more money because of that. So I might as well cooperate with this guy as opposed to being an asshole to him. So,
Right.
I mean, there were some were, were not easy to work with for whatever reason, but most of them were. The one guy who I miss, I wish I had the opportunity to work with more, was the late great Ernie Roth, the Grand Wizard. And I feel bad for Ernie. I mean, he died in October of 1983, just before the business was exploding. And he was a great heel manager, and he really could have done well with that explosion of the WWF nationwide. He really could have. And it's just unfortunate that he passed away. He was very gracious to me. I only knew Ernie a couple months, but very gracious, very professional. And he knew where this thing was going. And he welcomed us rather quickly. Gorilla Monsoon was pretty welcoming as well too. I mean, Gorilla still had a part in the business still, so he wanted things to succeed. He may not have agreed with Vince on how quickly the direction was going, but he got on board when things were going well and money was good. Arnie Skolin was another one that was part of the old Capitol Wrestling crew, and I think he was a little skeptical as well too. But being a road agent, he saw what these box offices were, and these road agents used to walk around with tens of thousands of dollars in their metal cases, and they weren't going to go to the office for 3 weeks. And then a guy named Bob McMullen, who became the CFO, said, no, we can't do that this way. You're going to take it to a bank and deposit it. And these guys were like, it was hard for them to fathom that, like, oh my God, we got to take it to the bank. It was for their own safety. I mean, these guys used to keep these metal boxes underneath their beds in the hotel rooms. Like, I wouldn't even bother. I would be scared to do that as well too, But that was the nature of the business back then.
You brought up the Grand Wizard, and it's funny that you brought him up because I've often wondered about this. So there's always been this debate about Magnum TA, and if he would have never been injured, if Hogan would have gotten as big as he did, because Magnum, I think, was destined to go to the WWE, or maybe he would have been the Hogan of his territory, right? And I've always had the same questions about the Grand Wizard with Bobby the Brain Heenan. I've always wondered if the Grand Wizard would have been around when wrestling truly exploded in the 80s like that, would Bobby the Brain Heenan, would he have gone on to still be that number one heel manager the way he did? Or would it be the Grand Wizard and Bobby would have been number two?
I think Bobby Heenan, because of his personality and gimmick for the wrestling business, he'd still be the number one heel. You have to understand, The Wiz, Blassie, Lou Albano, they were getting up there in age, and they were starting to age out. And by WrestleMania 3, they really had aged out at that point. So then that was that transition with Heenan coming in from the AWA, and they incorporated him on Tuesday Night Titans, and the sidekick to Gorilla Monsoon. I think that was destined to happen no matter what. I mean, Bobby Heenan was a treasure, a wrestling treasure. I mean, he was so good and so good. Things just rolling out of his head and off the cuff, and so spontaneous. I mean, and these other guys like Blassie and Albano, I think even to Wiz, they were more choreographed. They were more scripted. These are things that they talked about, and if you took the brain of this guy's wrestler and put it in a parakeet, the parakeet would fly backwards. I mean, that's what stuff what Albano used to say. Magula Gala or whatever for head injury or brain or something.
Right.
The gobbledygook that Lou used to say. And Fred Blassie running around saying, "You pencil neck geek, you know." But
Right.
they were, or the Wiz yelling McMahon, and in a sneering way. But with Heenan, anything and everything was possible at any given moment. That was the beauty of Bobby Heenan.
Yep. And so I have time for about one more question, but I would like to schedule you to come on again in the next week or two if you have time, because I haven't even gotten to the questions that I wrote down to ask you. I've been going according to our conversation, so I would love to have you back because there's so much that I want to talk to you about, if you're okay with that. But my last question is this. I'm going back to, you said that, you had left writing and then you were in charge of the merch, and stuff like that. Why did you leave writing? And is that something you wanted to do?
A couple of things. At that point, yes, I was willing to walk away from writing. The grind, the rewrites, the rejection, just trying to please Vince and Linda on these storylines, which would drive you crazy. I also learned that as a writer, I had a shelf life just like a wrestler. I was used as much as I could be. And to their credit, they realized that they had to go in a different direction, and I was fine with that too. So that's all right. Did it bruise my ego a little bit? Yeah, it did. Did it keep me out of going back to newspapers and mainstream journalism? It sure did. Back then, you couldn't go back that easily. I mean, down the road, 5-10 years from there, where magazine format, the lines in the sand were blurred. So you could go back and do that. But no newspaper editor in his right mind was going to hire a guy who just wrote wrestling fiction. It just wasn't going to happen. So getting in, I was learning a new skill and a new trade, but we also were, we would see these things at TV, TV taping. If you look back in those mid 83 to 87, when we did television taping, and especially Allentown and Hamburg, you saw kids in the first 2 rows have new merchandise. That was planted. That was by design, because that stuff would appear in the magazines, or Vince would cut a promo or a commercial for it, and the orders were flooding in, hand over fist. And he was tapping into the family thing and the kid thing. And that was really, really important. And the money is all the same that comes in. I don't know if that's happening today. I think it's more of the older crowd and people who've got the credit card, the debit card, and who wear the 3X merchandise,
Right.
So, I mean, that's a whole different mindset at this point. So it's changed. So getting into merchandising, man, my WrestleMania 3, I'm going to leave you with this. We grossed $550,000 for WrestleMania 3. Now, 1987, you may think that's not a lot of money, but minimum wage was like $3 an hour.
Yeah.
At that point, a T-shirt was $20 at that point. Our WrestleMania program was $10 at that. So there's something floating around the internet with my name on it from one of the vendor company out there. We sold 32,000 programs at the Pontiac Silverdome just for WrestleMania.
Wow.
We emptied out the warehouse in Stamford to send everything to Detroit. We were also moving the warehouse as well too that same weekend, and this way, hopefully, a lot of stuff weren't coming back that we had to put back into inventory.
Wow,
so it was done. It was done correctly. That was if today's dollars, that $550,000 is $1.65 million.
Right. Wow. Ed, thank you for coming on. Fans, when I get back, we'll be back from our road trip in about 7 days. I'm going to schedule Ed to come back because I want to talk to him more, starting with him working in merch and talking about a lot of other things that happened in professional wrestling whenever he was there. I really appreciate you joining me, Ed. This has been so interesting. I really enjoyed our conversation. Like I said, I haven't even gotten to any of the questions that I had to ask you for my research on you because the conversation has been so good. So, but we will get there. We will have a part 2. Please subscribe to my podcast, guys. I get great guests on all the time. Again, we'll have Ed back for our part 2. Again, my friend, thank you for coming on. I'm enjoying your state of New York. It is so beautiful out here. It really is. We are heading out tomorrow, making our way to Salem, Massachusetts is where we're heading next. And then from there, we're going to head back home. Thank you for coming on. And again, everyone, please subscribe to the podcast. Until then, you all have a great night.